Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Chalia with PHCA. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, presented by Jen Bruning. A few quick updates to share before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website. The webinar has been approved for one continuing education credit for all attendees. For those who provided a NAB number, credits will be uploaded within the next 2 to 3 weeks. As we begin today, all attendees should be in listen-only mode. Please feel free to submit your questions via the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer as many of those questions as possible at the end of today's presentation. Now I'll turn things over to Jen.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I know you are very busy people. You are probably in that gap between your breakfast and lunch service. And so I really appreciate your attentiveness and you're willing to spend the hour here today with me. As Kim said, my name is Jen Bruning. I'm a registered dietitian, as well as the Director of Nutrition and Brand Innovation for a senior living GPO called Incite Strategic Partners. A few objectives for today's presentation about leveraging your dining program to build back your census. At the end of the presentation, I'm hoping that you'll be able to identify at least 3 ways in which menu changes can help to entice new residents to have interest in moving to your communities, as well as boosting satisfaction among your existing residents. I hope that you will learn 2 characteristics of an inviting dining room environment and an upgrade to that space that you may want to consider for the future, and that you can put into practice 3 marketing techniques to engage new residents as well as their families. So before we jump into the meat of the presentation today, we'll talk about a few kind of different sections here as we go. The agenda today is we'll look at what trends drive your pipeline generations. As so many of you are aware, your baby boomer generation is that up and coming, very large pipeline generation that has a few different attributes than previous generations. So we'll talk a bit about that. We'll discuss what is important to your prospective residents. What are the kind of push-pull factors that lead to a decision to move into senior living from one's family home? Ideas for putting all of that into practice, and then your key takeaways. So you may kind of all be thinking, even based on the title of the presentation, like, well, we're not at full census yet, but I don't think it's the dining program that's the problem, right? Like, you have other things going on. There is a continued issue with getting back to staffing levels pre-pandemic. There may be, things that were in the works as far as large projects that need to be put to the side. So there's so many considerations when it comes to the things that can influence your census. But after today's presentation, I really hope that your dining program is kind of this like shining light of positivity and really demonstrating to your prospective residents out in the world that you're able to not just meet their needs, but exceed their expectations with what you're able to provide. Because obviously there's a lot of complex reasons that people do or do not choose to move from home into their new home in senior living. So let's kind of dive in here and talk a little bit about the pipeline generations and the dining trends associated with them. Excuse me. So the folks that you have primarily gotten to know, whether you've been doing this for 5 years, 25 years, a lot of the folks that have been your residents in senior living have been part of the greatest generation. So this is the generation that spans the 27 years between 1901 and 1928. This is a really interesting generation because the inconsistent data on their size makes it a little bit hard to draw conclusions about how many people have been part of this generation through time, right? The best estimate is that this generation is about 60 million people strong, but census data from this time is pretty inconsistent. We obviously didn't have any Social Security numbers until the 1930s. So we didn't have the best birth and death record keeping during this time in our history. And so we're not sure exactly how big this generation has been. and how many of those folks made their way into older age and then were able to enter into the senior living landscape. This is also a generation that spans an exceptionally long period of time. So 27 years is a little bit longer than what we normally look at for generation sizes. And you know, the years on either end of these generations fluctuate. They can fluctuate depending on who you talk to. It's tough to get things kind of locked down into what years we're talking about. Believe me, as a cusper on the edge of millennial and Gen X, I have this conversation a lot. So normally we're looking at a period between 15 and 20 years. So again, that 60 million from the greatest generation is a little bit wonky when it comes to predicting out what the future will kind of hold for folks. Not to mention, we're now in the 2020s, right? So most of these folks are kind of moving through, you know, coming to the conclusion of this generation as far as folks in senior living. And more of your population at this point is going to be members of the silent generation. Folks that were born in those years between essentially the Depression and the end of World War II. Understandably, this has led to a much smaller generation than the upcoming baby boomer generation. If we look at the boomers there, we can see that in that post-war generation, that next 16 or so years, there were almost 30 million more people born in that period of time than the preceding 17 years, which is pretty crazy. And that's why, you know, in senior living, we think about the baby boomers so much, and we've talked about it for so long, because we've known that this very large generation by comparison is on its way. Other things that we'll talk about when it comes to the baby boomers are the fact that they are going to be living longer than their preceding generations. And so you don't have the losses earlier in life at the same rate that you have for these previous generations, which means that in senior living, we have a whole lot of people that will be living quite a long time, and they will need our services. There's something about that can kind of help us see into the future and go, oh my gosh, you know, it's almost inevitable, right, that we'll need places for folks to go, and we'll have kind of some competition, right? Like we'll need to kind of be going after the folks that we can best serve in our communities as our resident pipeline. I can talk a lot about generations, so I'll cut myself off there. And we'll talk just a minute here about a little snippet around wealth. Obviously, many of our residents may fall under the Medicare, Medicaid banners. There can be public assistance. There's a lot of different payer sources that you all are juggling at the same time, depending on how your communities are structured. For the sake of the section of our resident population that may be able to afford private pay, this is just kind of a snapshot into the age groups that have held the most wealth in the US for the last 30 years. If you look at that far left side, that's about 1990 or so. And you can see that between the 40 to 54 and 55 to 70 age groups, there is some kind of equal distribution of wealth there, a little bit less into that older population. But you can almost see it happen, right? That baby boomer generation who was in, you know, more of their 40s in 1990 or so, as they aged along up through the decades, they started to hold on to more of that wealth, a higher percentage of that wealth. Not only has wealth generation grown in the US, but the folks that are 55 and over, if we go all the way to the right side of that graph, you can see how much wealth is held by people 55 and above, which is our people, right? That's our folks. So this is not to say that everybody over the age of 55 is swimming in wealth, but we do have an example here of the amount of wealth being held by folks of older generations. There's a lot of trends that we can kind of identify between our different generations, right? As you're very well aware, especially if you are running food service with seniors, a lot of folks in this silent generation, that Depression through World War II generation, they're very traditional, and of course traditional is a very subjective word, but traditional in the sense of kind of an old school, all-American kind of diet, which is a lot of meat and potatoes, right? This is a meat and potato generation. The cultural influences outside of their perceived tradition are very limited. So things like more interesting, cultural foods from around the world, maybe of less interest to them. They are folks who grew up primarily with restaurant options being things like Italian, Mexican, or Chinese buffet style type eating out. And they also did a little bit less travel, right? Like this is the generation that worked their whole life, they saved, and then in retirement, they may take a trip or two to kind of celebrate that part of their life, celebrate their retirement, but it hasn't been travel in the kind of immersive way that later generations have experienced. With the baby boomers, we have folks who are much more adventurous eaters compared to that silent generation. These folks did much more travel. If we think about that wealth graph there, these folks, as they were getting older, becoming empty nesters, they took some of that wealth and they have been really enjoying life with it. That means that there's been more restaurants, especially if we think about, if you're of a certain age where you can think back in the last 20 years or so and look at the changing landscape of restaurant options and think about how many more interesting, diverse cuisines from around the globe are offered, even in smaller towns. You can see that these folks were the ones that were out trying those new restaurants. They have a more developed global kind of palate. They appreciate the nuance between different cultures. And these folks have traveled. They've been to more countries. They just have a more kind of well-rounded viewpoint on trying new foods. They also have a focus on health and wellness that the previous generations just kind of haven't had. Not that past folks haven't cared about their health, but the baby boomer generation has more locked in the message that their lifestyle and their choices can influence their health outcomes. So their expectation is that there will be options for them in senior living that help to support them on that journey, whatever the health concern is. And we'll talk about their specific health concerns in a slide in just a little bit here. But that is a really big deal for them, is that even if they don't choose the healthiest option every time, that it's there for them as a choice. Again, they're more interested in more nuanced flavors. Fish and seafood's a little bit more popular with this group because they've been living in a time when you could get good quality seafood and fish that no matter where you live in the country compared to earlier generations. And they also have a renewed interest in plant-based or plant-forward eating. I have a slide coming up that talks a little bit more about this in depth, but kind of surprisingly, this group of people of 65 and over aged people right now have more interest in eating less meat than people of previous generations. It's really interesting. That's not where your mind usually goes, I think. So this is a quote that I liked from an executive director in a senior living community that says, "The latte and sushi generation is coming." And this was in a New York Times article, but what I want to draw your attention to is the date when that article was published. 2014, people were saying this. So almost a decade ago, there were executive directors, and this person in particular was part of kind of a higher end, more affluent assisted living community that was saying that these are the expectations that are coming with this new influx of residents. Okay, I mentioned a minute ago the interest in more plant-forward eating, and this was a Gallup poll from a few years ago that was talking to different age groups, different generations of folks, and of all of those groups, the 65 and over had the largest percentage of folks that responded yes when they asked if you were interested in eating less meat. 26% of that group said that was of interest to them, and health was the #1 reason why. That's the major reason. So understanding again that folks, it's not that folks are shifting completely over to vegetarianism or veganism, but they just have an interest in trying different sources of protein, more plant-based protein and things like that. And this is a much heavier interest with women than men. 30% versus about 15% of men said that they were interested in eating less meat in this survey. All right, and folks definitely are trying to eat healthier since the pandemic as well. I'd mentioned to you that we have this slide on health concerns. So when we talk about baby boomers, their health journey, their lifestyle, and the ways that lifestyle can help support them as they age, these are the major health concerns that baby boomers are worried about or possibly even living with currently. These are things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease and cancer, depression, problems with their vision, cognitive issues like Alzheimer's, arthritis, and their stress levels. And I thought this was interesting too, that since the pandemic, 86% of baby boomers say that they are thinking more about their mental health. There is something about having gone through the isolation and the kind of cutoff from others that we all experienced in the last few years that really had folks being more reflective about their mental health. And that's just kind of a side note in this presentation, since we are focused on dining. But something that there is to think about is that there may also come with this new influx of residents some desire for mental health services, or to have that be part of their overall kind of care plan. There we go. Excuse me. So here we are in 2023. So by 2030, in the next 7 years, couple quick just snapshots here. About 25% of seniors are expected to be living with diabetes. About 33% will live with obesity, and about half of baby boomers will be suffering from arthritis. And this is important when we talk about dining, right? Some of the things that we'll talk about in a moment that are push-pull factors for folks looking to move are their decreased abilities in terms of mobility, their decreased dexterity even. Can they cook? Can they chop food? What are the difficulties they're having at mealtimes in their home? So all of these things can be a factor when we think about how do we meet folks where they're at when they're thinking of coming into our communities as a resident. Oops, there we go. Sorry, a little hold up there in my screen advancement. Okay, I keep saying push-pull factor. So what am I talking about here? These are the factors that are partially what comes into consideration when it comes to folks deciding on whether or not they will be moving from the home they've been in into senior living. Push factors are those things that essentially are pushing them out the door. What are the things within the home that they just simply can't manage, or that are becoming untenable for them? That the reasons why they may be, not because they're wanting to move necessarily, but because they're feeling that they must. And these are things like difficult or unmanageable health conditions. And of course, that runs the gamut in so many ways, from mobility to pill management, being able to prep meals, eat meals, things like that. Having declining ADLs, if folks are realizing that they maybe are having trouble getting up out of their chair, getting to the restroom on time, those daily just activities, things like grocery shopping, driving, bathing oneself. There's so many different things that can start to come into play here that folks kind of go, you know what, I actually can't manage this anymore, or this is too difficult. And kind of along with that, as people are experiencing these issues at home, oftentimes it is family that steps in to help them out, and they're becoming aware that they may be feeling as though they're a burden to their family, and they don't want that for their family. So they're looking at different options. There may be concerns around maintaining a house or property, especially if there's a large lawn or an older home that ends up needing a lot of repair work. Even things just like switching out light bulbs, those things that are difficult to do if you are becoming, if you're having issues with your mobility, with even just arthritis, things like that. There's a lot of concerns around that. And for some folks, they're a little tired of mowing the lawn. The idea that they can come to a place where they don't have to worry about any of these issues. All they have to do if there's an issue is pick up the phone and say that they need a light bulb changed. That's a really nice thought for a lot of people. Then there, of course, is the loneliness factor. Often this comes with the death of a spouse or loss of other family members. So that's certainly something that gets folks thinking, especially if they, even if it was just kind of them and their spouse, that was at least their kind of person. And so folks can really have loneliness as a push factor. Just, I'm tired of being alone, right? I'm tired of having no one to talk to. So that can be another push factor. Pull services are the things that you all have a little bit of say over. These are all of the wonderful things that you are doing in your community to welcome new people and to be able to say, we have all this for you, we will do all this for you. Here are all the things that you can do when you're here so that you still feel useful and you still feel a productive member of community. Things like the services and the level of care. So those are pull factors. What is it that they need at home that they're not getting? Well, how can you meet that need and exceed that expectation with your level of service and the care that you provide? Similarly with community and friendships, being able to offer all these different levels of kind of community, whether it is the happy hours at a kind of a bar or pub space, or simply just introducing folks with similar interests so that they have someone to talk to and potentially spark that new friendship. Your activities and amenities. What is there to do? I know that when I was working in skilled nursing, so often people would people would have this feeling of they didn't want to get bored. They didn't want to give up a lot of the things they enjoy doing. They simply needed a little help to do them. They didn't want to feel old. So what are all the ways in which you can engage folks in terms of your activities and amenities? And dining is such a big part of this. As we talked about, especially with baby boomers, these are the folks that travel. These are the folks that love restaurants. And these are the folks that are looking at a little bit higher end offering as well. It's the latte generation, right? So they expect having a lot of these types of options you get out in the world to be able to have those in senior living as well. And all of that funnels into this concern around maintaining their lifestyle. Aside from even just helping them out with the health issues and being able to meet them where they're at on that journey, whatever it is that they're living with, are they able to be active? Are they able to watch the game that they love, whatever sports team that they follow? There's so many different attributes of this. Baby boomers are just committed to maintaining the lifestyle they've established for themselves. All right, when I first put this presentation together, I had this slide in here around a barrier to moving being COVID concerns. And I think that we're essentially past that from the perspective of the individual being concerned for their health or safety in regards to COVID with a move to senior living. Occupancy is recovering. Q1 of 2020, prior to everything starting with the pandemic, occupancy average was about 87%. As of the end of Q2 of 2023, it's close to 84. So we're on the road to recovery. And part of this isn't necessarily that folks are more hesitant to make a move. As we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, many of you are still dealing with staffing issues, which may hamper your ability to admit more residents because we have those staffing ratios. There are updates to these staffing ratios and the laws behind them all the time. So that can be more of an issue than the individual not being ready for a move in some cases. Other things that can give folks a little bit of a pause in terms of making the move is that, again, that concern over loss of activity or access to their family. Will they come visit me? Can they join me for a meal? Can we have a birthday party all together if I live here? All those things really important to consider. They don't want to lose the independence that they have. And thankfully, I think that most senior living is very ready to have that discussion with prospective residents around the fact that the highest level of independence is the goal for folks. You come to kind of that mutual place of, yes, you need help here, but we want you to be able to do this for yourself. And then, is there a trend of aging in place? So as many folks that I have talked to in the last few years who really resist the concept of leaving their homes, I think that this preference is starting to trend down, and it's for all of those kind of push factor reasons. I think for several years, folks have felt like they couldn't move, but now that that's kind of recovering, they're looking around and saying, I'm actually having a hard time managing this. I'm tired of being alone, all those other push factors that we talked about. Okay. We've been talking a lot about things other than food and dining, so let's kind of jump back into that. Again, silent generation, those folks up until the end of World War II are looking for more traditional meat and potatoes style, kind of less, I don't want to say less fancy necessarily because this is the fine dining generation, but they don't need a lot of like flourishes on their food, right? In terms of, zest or things like that. So I don't know about literal zest, but something that makes the food pop a little bit. These are folks that are a little bit happier with really good quality, just more, again, kind of those traditional American, which I really say in quotes strongly because that means a lot of things to a lot of people. But we ask the individuals what their tradition looks like, and for a lot of folks in this generation, again, meat and potatoes. Boomers, just to reiterate, health and wellness support, more interesting flavors. They want options. They want options in those actual items available, and they want options throughout the day. So this is not a group of people that are likely to be satisfied by having a set mealtime 3 times a day with an offer for a small snack. These are folks that are going to want options for a larger part of the day. Some locations are even considering a 24/7, some kind of option there as well. And they're looking for that restaurant-like ambiance and experience. So just because they are moving into senior living does not mean they want to give up having options that feel more like that favorite restaurant. This Gallup poll, again, going back almost a decade, says baby boomers say that concerns over a change to their lifestyle is one of the biggest barriers to moving to senior living. So again, not just things that are kind of said vaguely out in life, but a Gallup poll actually confirmed this 10 years ago, prior to folks really being at a point where they would be, a lot of them would be making a consideration, right? So I always use my mom as the comparison point. She is the oldest of the boomers, born in 46. And so I kind of think of her as the benchmark here. And if 10 years ago when she was in her 60s, wouldn't even have been thinking about it, right? So we need to, again, have that mindset of what are the pain points that folks have when it comes to leaving their homes, making a change to senior living, and how can you use your dining program and your marketing program to reassure them about that change. Boomers want to eat what they want when they want it. We are moving away somewhat from the fine dining concept with the white linen tablecloths and the place settings and things like that, and more towards something a little bit less formal, not having set times, a more robust, always available menu, things like that. And again, those new spins on traditional favorites. So we're talking about things like a Thai chili burger. We have that familiar format of the burger. What can we do to really jazz that up and bring in some of those other global influences that folks have gotten used to? What are those different global flavors they like? Is it something Japanese or Thai? Is it an Indian mulligatawny that shows up on your menu? What sorts of whole foods and natural flavors do you have access to? And this is where I think there can be some reimagining of the products that you bring into your kitchen. Because when we think of pre-prepared or frozen, kind of ready to cook products, while those of us intimately in the industry know that there are so many amazing new products out there of really high quality and fantastic taste and texture, other folks may still have the more institutional kind of throwback hospital food mindset around some of these products. So I think it's really important to understand your options here, because even if something is a more pre-processed product, like a black bean burger, you still have a recognizable list of ingredients there and a discernible ingredients, in the black beans and things like that. So we can still talk about things like whole foods and natural flavors, even within the context of a food that's pre-prepared. Okay, does that make sense? Again, access to foods that address health concerns, big thing for baby boomers especially. So they're especially responsive to things like indications on a menu that something may be lower sodium, heart healthy, carb controlled, whatever our kind of wording is on that. So we'll just check the time here real quick. We're doing great. Anybody need a stretch break? I know, it's hard to sit still for an hour, right? All right, so putting this into practice, what does some of this look like? Excuse me, I'm just going to take a quick drink. All right. You have so many opportunities to impress folks with your dining program. And before I kind of click ahead through all this content, I just want folks to realize that I am not suggesting that you do all of this, particularly all at one time. Not only will it not be possible for you to make these big menu changes, particularly if you are having any kind of staffing issues or recent staff turnover in your kitchen, but that's not what your residents are looking for either. We never want to sacrifice what the residents that we currently have are looking for the sake of that next generation coming in. But there's great ways here to kind of meet in the middle. And my best suggestion is to try one thing. So you'll have, access to this information. And if there's something in all of this that really resonates with you, oh, I've been meaning to try that. Mrs. Jones asked if we had this product. Oh, someone just said this the other day. things like that, things that are kind of on your radar already. Maybe there's a piece of equipment that's on its last legs and it's time to consider asking for the funds to replace that piece of equipment, whatever that looks like. If there's one thing you can just jot down as your takeaway from things you can do, realistically do when it comes to your opportunities here, that's a great place to start. All right, so your menus. This can be some of the easiest things to swap out because you don't actually have to take anything away from your menus if you just want to try adding one thing. There's so many ways to do that, whether it's a daily special, a limited time offer, maybe it's a sample of a new product that you bring to resident council. So many ways to do this. So some things to consider. Again, looking for more of those kind of interesting cultural global foods that focus more on even regionality. So we talked a little bit about that previous generation liking the kind of Chinese buffet or Italian restaurant or Mexican, which a lot of times is a little bit more Tex-Mex, and getting a little nuance in there with a Szechuan flavor, a Sicilian recipe, or Oaxacan inspired Mexican food. So getting a little bit into the details there and using these words descriptively with your menu so that folks know what to expect. Having health and wellness options, again, I think an always available menu is such a great way to do this because many things like a salad can be made ahead of time. That can be something that's available to folks 24/7. Being able to do more flatbreads, smoothies that are available to folks. Thinking in terms of foods that are both very flavorful and kind of hit that travel section, in a person's mind, as well as meeting where they're at with their health journey, or things like the Mediterranean diet or the slightly varied Mind diet, which is a Mediterranean style diet with a focus on cardiovascular and cognitive health, lower sodium, lots of greens, antioxidants, things like that. Many of these options are naturally more plant forward, and you could easily swap in and out those sources of protein to make them more plant-based as something just to try out with folks. Higher antioxidant levels, again, some of those more natural and whole foods showing up on your menus with easily identifiable ingredients is a great thing. And having options for things like omega-3s and sources of healthy fats. This generation of both baby boomers and the silent generation, they're also the fish oil generation, right? So these are folks that in midlife, we started hearing a lot of the benefits to fish oil. A lot of folks started taking fish oil as a supplement. So not that I'm suggesting that everybody be on supplements, but there's a mindset around acceptance of foods that contain these things that they're familiar with. So being able to offer really amazing food instead of the supplement is kind of a great thing for folks. All right, showcasing healthful trends. Again, if you have some options that you can easily do using gluten-free ingredients, tough to claim gluten-free if you're in a kitchen where you have gluten in the environment, but you can always say that you have something like a gluten-free wrap available or something like that, or made without gluten is a great way to say that. Plant-based, Mediterranean, those healthful trends. Mediterranean diet's been ranked #1 diet for health and satisfaction 5 years in a row. So it's really out there as something that folks enjoy. And again, I mentioned this a minute ago, but bring these ideas to the Culinary Council of Residents or Resident Council. Bring ideas, bring samples, talk to them about what they might like to see. You may be surprised as you get the conversation going to hear what especially maybe some of your younger residents are looking for. Oops. Go. All right. Some of you are likely to be serving some texture modified diets to some of your residents. And you may or may not have made the switch from the National Dysphagia Diet to the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, or IDDSI. I'm going to say that as IDSI for the purpose of this call. Some of you may have switched from NDD to IDSI, some of you may have not. That is a consideration to make because IDSI is just so much more nuanced. Obviously, if you have a clinical team, you want to work with them so that your speech therapists are all on board with making this change if you haven't already. And if you're having any hesitation around that when it comes to training or resources, the IDSI website is actually has a lot of those resources for you. So great way to get started. Pardon me. There's also a lot of new products, techniques, and training available. So whether you've realized it or not, these 3 photos that you see on your screen are all pureed foods. These 3 meals are all appropriate for a pureed diet. Even what appears to be toasted bread, this is actually pureed foods, and it's things that are readily available out in the marketplace for you in terms of having access to these. And it's really just a matter of taking those moments to make sure that staff are very trained, have them practice these techniques, and you may really be able to impress those folks that are on these texture modified diets with what you're able to create. There are also opportunities when it comes to trying to meet the needs of other health concerns. So things like spice blends that are either low or no sodium spice blends that are developed by chefs. Because we are in an educational environment, I won't be naming names, but there is a company that's in my mind as I'm talking about this that has actually had some of their spice blends kind of certified by National Kidney Foundation as things that can really be used to meet those needs of a lower sodium diet for folks that are very salt sensitive or have a health condition that requires less sodium. While we do try to move away from restriction most of the time in senior living, there are those folks who would benefit from a little bit less sodium. And they actually have these amazing spice blends that can do the work of adding that zest that we talked about and those more global flavors. It does that work for you because the spice blend is right there and you can simply add it to a recipe you already make. It's a very easy switch to really bring something new to your residents. And you may also want to consider something like an updated menu system, whether that's menu extensions that include more regional fare or health and wellness driven extensions, or simply just having an always available menu that encapsulates things like a Mind Diet or Mediterranean. It's not limited to those 2, but having those options available is fantastic. All right, what about in between our meals? Boomers love to snack. I don't know who doesn't love to snack, but for the purpose of our presentation, we'll focus in on this group of people and, looking at some surveys and trends and purchasing data, because, I didn't say this before, but I think one of the reasons why I love talking about this generation is because the post-war generation, we know so much more about their entire life of food and dining trends and history. We know that we had this big surge of more processed foods and processing canned foods. All these things became available. The grocery industry kind of boomed after the war, right? So we know a lot more about how they've shopped, how they've eaten, where they've eaten, how much they've cooked, so much more about them from birth all the way through up to this point in life than we have previous generations. So it's of interest, right? But I digress. Top snacks for folks. Again, we see that mix of choice and health with things like fruit, nuts, and yogurt, balanced out with preferences for potato chips, candy bars, and chocolate. So again, folks like options. They may or may not choose the healthier option on a given day, but they want to know it's there. Hydration, you have so many options here. And I think this is, again, a pretty easy lift when we do things like, I'm sure many of you already do, things like spa water and other low sugar options. It's not that folks are necessarily looking for a lot of artificial sweeteners, but just things with a little bit less sugar in them naturally. There may be, again, looking at those texture modified folks, if they need a thickened beverage, there may be options there with products or different flavors. Plant-based supplements, there's many supplement lines that are coming out with fully plant-based supplement options. So folks that maybe can't tolerate the lactose or are looking for more recognizable ingredients may be drawn to things like the plant-based supplement shakes. And again, cafe and bar options. I've got a slide in a little bit here that talks about convertible spaces. And is there just a corner somewhere where you could do a coffee shop in the morning and flip it to a bar in the evening? Something like that. Is that possible? I think it's such a cool idea. And then, of course, socializing, more social events where we have snacks and drinks being served, can tie those into all kinds of activities and different events. And events can just run the gamut. Many of you do these things already, but if anybody is needing a little bit more inspiration to bring back what maybe we had stopped doing during the pandemic or need some new ideas, this can run the gamut from celebrations, whether it's the monthly birthday party, big anniversaries. If you have a couple that lives in your community and has a big anniversary, something for them. the big game. This could be anything from the local Little League team all the way up through the high school team going to state, the college team, or the pro sports team. If there is a big game happening in your town or in your state, that is such an amazing thing to take as an opportunity to impress residents, and even have folks have arranged tours at the time so they can really see the showcase of what you're doing for folks and make sure that they understand that their loved one will be able to continue to participate in this community event. Bringing in speakers. Again, most of us have lifted those COVID restrictions. So bringing folks in to speak about different topics, particularly if they are food or dining oriented. So local farmers, you could even do a small farmers market when that person comes in, bringing in a chef or having a chef demo. I think a lot of us have in our towns that restaurant that everybody loves, especially the older crowd. I can think of a couple in my hometown. And what would that be like if you were able to bring the chef, one of the chefs from that restaurant, in to have a cooking demo for your folks? How cool would that be, right? That's amazing. Tastings of new products. Again, we talk about all these new product lines that are emerging in the last few years to meet this growing need for these different options for folks. Could you bring in a little of that product? Maybe there's a sample available through that brand that they would send you a case of something, and you could have during an event a tasting of a new product. Are there pilot programs through those same brands? Several of them that I've worked with will do these different kind of mini studies around the time and labor savings of a pre-prepared product with discussion around the acceptability. So there it goes from how much time does this save and therefore labor dollars, all the way up through how much do the residents enjoy this. So interesting things you can kind of become a part of. If I look at my time, I realize I have a lot more to cover here. Okay. Design trends. All right. So full disclosure, I am not an interior designer. I'm a dietitian, but I find every aspect of the dining program so interesting that I really wanted to be sure that we talk about this. So I've tapped into the resources that I have at my disposal to look a little bit at what design trends for baby boomers are like. So for those of you who are looking at spaces, dining spaces, cafe spaces, whatever that looks like, that are getting to be much older, maybe they're fairly tired, maybe they feel dark and they're just in need of a refresh. And this is a conversation that you can have with the folks that would be signing the checks on this. I think it's really important to not only work with partners that can help make these decisions, but have an understanding of what you want to look at as well. Because even if you are a dietitian or a dining director and you don't have necessarily a lot of expertise in interior design, you want to be able to come in with your opinion to be able to say, here are the things we need to be sure that we have in place, right? So things that baby boomers are looking for. Some of this I took from some articles that talk about what this generation has been looking for in their own homes, because obviously we want to take what they prefer as their home environment and be able to translate that into senior living. So they're at a place where they're looking for a combination of comfort and function with a design element. They want things to look nice, but they also want them to be low maintenance, easy, comfortable, functional for their space. They may want fewer things in their home, fewer pieces of furniture, things like that. They want to make sure that they have better lighting. So the lighting in their home that may have sustained them for decades, they may be finding now isn't quite adequate. So things like lighting concepts, and we'll talk about this with your dining spaces in a sec. They like the travel inspiration and they like the flexible space. Many folks, especially if they are downsizing prior to coming to senior living, like the concept of a combination guest room and office, something like that. It's a multi-use space. Color palettes, and again, everybody is an individual and has the colors that they prefer, but generally speaking, the color palettes preferred by this generation are in a lot of the blues as a base color with something like a purple or green undertones. And they like to really consider marrying an indoor and outdoor kind of color palette and feel to their home. They like looking at complementary colors, as well as these kind of chameleon neutrals that will take on a little bit of the hue of more of those eye-popping colors like the blues and purples. Excuse me. A few more considerations for your dining room if you're looking at a renovation or an interior design refresh. Are the color stories not just on trend, but are they suitable for your resident population? So aside from just the colors themselves, how are these being used? Because if you have something like a flooring pattern with a very high contrast light and dark, kind of smaller pattern, if you imagine like a zebra pattern, something like that, that can actually become very confusing to the eye, especially if a person has either a visual or a cognitive deficit. So you really want to be sure that the color stories you're selecting and the kind of patterns used and things like that are appropriate to your population. Is the lighting in your dining room adequate in terms of your total foot candles, but is it also mixed? Because you may have appropriate illumination in terms of top-down lighting, ceiling-based lighting, but that may actually create some very harsh shadows for folks. It may create a reflection if they're trying to look at a menu seated at a table. And you want to be sure that you have mixed sources of light in the dining space from something like a wall sconce or a lamp to be able to complement that overhead lighting so that you break up those shadows a little bit and make sure that everybody has access to lighting that works for them. Your flooring. I'm sure many of you have or have seen the dreaded rubber ridge that helps to fill the gap between types of flooring. And that rubber gap, while it's easy to navigate for most people, can also create a little bit of a bump if a person has a shuffling gait or uses a walker or other assistive device. Even though it's small, that can be kind of an issue. So you want to make sure that your flooring is varied to designate what spaces are for, as well as flush. Seating, again, we talked about, think all the way back to that slide where we talked about 2030. And we talked about folks who have gained weight or are living in a larger body that we technically would call obesity. So think about folks with mobility issues, arthritis, or other issues. And now we think about seating, right? Think about the type of seating that you prefer versus someone else. Seating, is your seating promoting independence, or is it all one type of chair, that kind of deeper sunken chair where you have the armrests and things like that? Do the armrests create something uncomfortable for a larger person? Could a person with mobility issues or joint issues have issues standing all the way up from that fully seated position? Would they benefit from something a little bit higher? So having multiple options for seating can literally be the difference between a resident staying in their room and coming out to the dining room. Imagine if you were that resident who didn't like the dining room because the seating was uncomfortable and you were embarrassed to say so, and so you never went to the dining room. And then you went out and joined an activity one day and noticed that now there is seating that works for you. And now you feel like you can come out of your room to eat. It's life-changing, truly, with this one change. So excuse me, something to consider. A few more things here, and we're starting to get a little close on time, so I may do a little bit of racing. Consider adding local flavor if you haven't already. If you have something architecturally significant like a bridge or a building in your town, that's great photography to add in, as well as those sports teams we talked about, local artists, things like that. And convertible spaces. I love this concept because so often we see kind of the blueprint of our buildings as we walk around, and we're so familiar with this space that it can be kind of hard to notice that actually there's a corner over here where we could set up a coffee bar that we could turn into a cocktail bar in the evening. What a cool thing to do, to add interest into a space and to make it usable throughout the day. If you have a dining hall, that's likely also your event space. And then one more idea, especially because I'm talking to folks in more of a northern state today, right? And so this idea of the outdoor area, here we are in the summertime, heading into a lovely fall, and you may have an outdoor space that you could actually use for dining on the days when the weather is appropriate, because we only have so many. I'm based out of Chicago, so I understand what these northern tier states can kind of look like from a weather perspective. And could you get folks out safely outdoors to eat during these nice months? I love this quote that I came across yesterday that just reinforces the current design discussions involving convertible spaces in a senior living community is very much on trend. So again, it's not just me coming up with these ideas, these are actually trends that we're seeing in the industry. This may be a time in which you are looking at new equipment, new tech, like an e-procurement system or an ordering or tray card system that can really make efficient your systems, especially if you have continued issues around staffing or you're having high turnover and therefore lots of training and losing a lot of that skill as they cycle out. You know, is there something that can streamline your operation and take tasks off your plate? New equipment, so many new things going on out there with smart ovens, sous vide options, cafe needs in terms of your setup, your dining options. Do you need things to help with IDDSI food preparation? Do you need new wares like updated trays and utensils? Are things looking tired, broken, chipped, things like that? Do you want to look at an induction heated base system? They've been around for quite a while, but that doesn't mean everybody already has them, and that technology continues to update. So something to consider. A little more in terms of tech, I am taking this from personal experience. Where is your Wi-Fi fast enough, and does it cover all corners of your property? The skilled nursing and rehab facility where I spent the first chunk of my career was a very interestingly built 200-bed facility with branches that kind of went off in 3 directions. And in those corners, in those end rooms, things like that, the Wi-Fi or even cell signal could be very spotty if non-existent. So make sure that you have things like routers set up so that folks know that their phone is going to work. This is going to be so important to the baby boomer generation. Older generations as well have gotten on the Facebook train. They have phones, they have iPads, the whole works. But especially since the pandemic, when everybody learned how to FaceTime, tech is going to be so much more important to these folks. So we want to make sure residents know how to log on, menus being digitized and accessible to folks on their devices. Are they mobile optimized? Such a big point, right? I'm learning so much about web development because I do so much with marketing, but being able to ensure that not only is the menu available on your website, but can folks actually see it correctly on their phone or their iPad? Can they access it? Are you able to send out alerts either to phones or to in-room televisions? Can you get folks motivated to come to the dining room for an event or a special tasting? In your resident areas of things like the dining halls, do you need larger flat screens for activities? Talk about the big game. What's fun is the big game if you can't see it, right? Do you need to think about an investment there? Can residents all hear and see what they're supposed to be participating in, or do you need something like a hearing solution? Again, great innovations in tech around hearing solutions in the form of headphones that are specific to folks who've experienced hearing loss. And one thing that I've become just obsessed with is this concept of robots in the dining room, okay? So I hope that some of you have seen these demoed at trade shows. If not, actually let me know and I'll see what I can do because these are such interesting solutions and the ROI is really amazing on these. In the very forward thinking, different organizations in senior living that have embraced this concept and acted as really beta testers in some ways for these products, they are seeing things like a cost savings that allowed for a 40% wage increase to their dining staff. Can you imagine? We talk about competition for talent and we talk about not being able to afford wage increases, but what if an investment not only paid for itself, but allowed you to be competitive with your wages for those talented people? That is what we're talking about when we talk about robotics. They are taking some of these more mundane or dangerous, I have a colleague who says dirty, dull, and dangerous are the 3 things that the robots can take from the humans, do them more efficiently with less risk so the humans can do what humans do best, which is interact with other people, provide care, stay in the dining room, not have to run back and forth to the dish room to bus tables. The robot's there to take care of that for you. And suddenly you don't need to have that second employee that you've not been able to hire for all of these months and years. You have a solution there. So this is really cool. They can also do all kinds of other things clinically, like fall prevention, communications, and all kinds of things. Oh, goodness. We have 7 minutes, so I'm going to fly through marketing. I think a lot of you are aware of this, but if you are not the person that handles marketing for your community, that's no problem. These are just ideas that you can maybe bring back to the team, see what's being done already, and really be able to insert your dining program into those efforts if it's not already. Because so often when I speak to folks in person and we take a quick raising of the hands, folks either don't know or their community is not on one of these social media platforms, okay? Even something like Instagram, where that's such a great, obviously the whole point of Instagram is being able to capture in photo or video, what you're doing. Are you showcasing your daily special, or are you only showing the special catering at the holiday? If you're only showing that special holiday catering, then that's all folks see when they are shopping for a new home. They see that you talk about food once every couple of months. right? What if your daily special was plated beautifully, held by a member of your staff smiling on camera? How much more at home would you feel if that's what you saw a community expressing to the world? Because 35% of boomers are using social to find new brands and 48% interact with those brands on social. So don't think for a minute that your community isn't part of that. Not to mention, even if you have folks who are prospective residents that aren't as technologically savvy, their kids are, and you can bet their grandkids are. So don't forget about the role that family plays in the shopping and decision-making around moving to senior living. Because even if you have that black bean burger that we talked about a little bit ago, and it's not your most popular menu item, but you showcase it on social media, you are demonstrating out to people that you're forward thinking and you have options, okay? Even if it's not the thing that most people gravitate towards for mealtime. A couple quick examples here that I absolutely love. Again, on the left, we've got this example of sticking with the fine dining. It's not going away completely, but we have a great example here of a very simply prepared grilled protein with some fresh veggies in a nicely set up dining room with a great view, great example there as well. And just being able to say, this is what it looks like if you come eat with us. Here's what the experience is. And then on the right, a lovely photograph here of, I believe this was a National Strawberry Day celebration that this location was having. And this is so simple. This was just fresh strawberries on a little bit of, I think it's kind of a pancake situation there, and a little whipped cream. So simple. It speaks to the local culture being in California where they grow so many strawberries. And again, just showcases that whole natural food and a fun event that people can participate in. So a note here, if boomers make up a large percentage of your target market, which it does for most of you, consider tailoring your platform strategy based on where they're more active. So of note, Facebook and then Instagram. All right, we're getting close to the end here, guys. Thank you so much for your attention. So when it comes to your sales and your tours, do you send a goodie bag home filled with cool things from your kitchen, even if this is something that you ordered from a local bakery, like a cookie with the company logo on it, something to remember you by? Can folks have a meal on the house when they come in for tours, or can they get one to go? And do you involve kitchen leaders and kitchen staff in tours? If you are a leader in the dining and nutrition space, it doesn't mean you have to go on the whole tour, but you are maybe available to answer questions, or you have a one-pager that talks about your dining program that's included in these tours with pictures, right, of all the awesome stuff you do. Moving through. All right, last slide. Prospective residents, especially those boomers, are looking for variety, customizability, and some healthy options on your menus. Your dining spaces should reflect both the needs and the tastes of your residents and feature that local flavor, whether it's artists or sports or architecture, whatever that looks like. Marketing efforts should include features of your dining program. Again, think about how much we eat with our eyes, and you have this lovely photo of whatever your special is, or just the daily menu offering. We practice plating. A lot of your staff will probably have some savvy with taking really good photos with a cell phone. I think most of us have a smartphone with a really good camera, which can really help highlight in a very quick, efficient way that these are things we want to put out to the world. And consider our tech innovation and renovations to impress not only your current residents, but the residents of tomorrow, because they have these expectations of you, right? So in closing, I just want to leave you again with, I threw a lot at you. There's so many ways in which you can go about really helping to leverage the dining program to help create a flow into your census with prospective residents. Pick one or two things, see what you can kind of get going. See how you can put that on social media or use it in marketing collateral with your sales team, and really start to just boast about what you do, because I know so many of you do it so well, often with so little, and it's very impressive. I know that not everything is possible, but kind of start to think outside the box, grab a couple of these tips and just see what's possible. So I'm going to open the chat here. It looks like I don't see questions currently, which is fine. I know that Kim can make my email available to everybody. Apologies for not having it right there front and center in the intro. And I'm happy to take questions, throughout the week, whatever you've got.
Yep.
All right,
And
that's all I've got.
feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions, and I can also forward those to Jen. I appreciate everyone's time. And Jen, thanks so much for this energetic presentation. I really appreciate it. And I
Thanks for
hope
having me.
everyone has a great, wait, we have a question. Yep, I will send the slides out with the credit information. Christy,
Great.
thanks so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.